Welcome back, and as always, it's a huge pleasure to have you with us. Well, looking at the country today, it seems very clear that while there are gains to be celebrated after 1994, critical areas of concern do still remain. Well, South Africa is held at ransom by a dwindling economy, unemployment, and continuously rising levels of inequality, and a lack of adequate social cohesion also making headlines. Well, the country is yet to see the realization of the socio-economic rights contained in the Bill of Rights and the equitable distribution of resources such as land to meet the needs of all who dwell in it. Now, that could soon change, however. Yesterday, we saw the launch of the Independent Advisory Panel on the Acceleration of Change and Transformation, which will look into the legislation regarding these areas of concern to see what is stalling transformation. We now have the privilege and the honor to be talking to the newly appointed chairperson of that panel, former president, who is President Kgalema Motlanthe, the former head of state. Thank you so much for joining us. Good morning and a warm welcome.
Good morning, and morning to your viewers.
I know it's a very grueling schedule, so we do appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
I believe that some of the key areas of focus will be land reform, equality laws, as well as the red tape that's hindering the progress of small businesses. Anything else that will be an area for you to focus on?
Well, we'll focus on four areas, really. The impact of legislation in four areas. The first is what is known as triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And the second is the creation of and equitable distribution of wealth. And the third is land reform, redistribution, restitution, and land tenure. And the fourth is nation building and social cohesion.
What necessitated the formation of this panel?
Well, this is the brainchild of the Speakers Forum, which is made up of all speakers from national right up to local sphere of government. And they felt that, as legislators who make laws and regulations, they need to understand the impact of the laws that they pass. Because, the central responsibility of legislators is to promulgate laws as well as to exercise oversight over the executive, who are the implementers.
There are questions that are being asked now, whether or not the panel is simply just repeating the work that's already been done by Parliament. What is the difference between this panel and the work of Parliament committees?
For starters, the panel would be independent. And secondly, the work that, the portfolio committees in Parliament do in terms of outreach and the NCOP in terms of taking Parliament to the people will be taken on board. So the panel is not to reinvent the wheel, but to collate all available information and done by researchers, the judiciary, for instance, portfolio committees in the legislatures, as I said, and synthesize that to establish its impact. And that is why there will be outreach programs, public hearings, as well as call for submissions.
I'm glad you touched on that because I wanted to ask you how you were going to go about doing that and whether you were going to engage the stakeholders there. But President, I'm sure you will understand the fact that in South Africa we've had a plethora of panels. There have been about a dime a dozen. And there's a lot of pessimism on whether or not they actually achieve the desired results. But how are you going to measure success of this particular panel?
Well, we have as a strategic partner the UNDP, which is supporting the work that we will be doing, and which means the final report would have to be of such a standard that it could be peer-reviewed and could also be used by the UN to do similar work in other parts of the world.
You touched on the final work there. The review panel, we understand, has a year to complete its tasks and make those recommendations that you touched on. They could include amendments to current laws or current legislation, I believe, but that is not a process that will happen overnight and something that can just happen at the whim of the panel. So how are you going to, A, make sure that you stick to that year, and B, that should there be any recommendations on changing legislation, that can happen?
Well, firstly, as I said, the final report will be made public, and it will be, submitted to the speakers' forums, and from there they will take it up, the recommendations in terms of where there's need to tweak legislation, where there's need to repeal legislation, because you see, we're looking at these areas, for instance, of creation of wealth. Just to give you an example, and equitable distribution of that wealth. Now, if legislation and regulatory framework it serves to impede the establishment of new enterprises and therefore job creation, we will point that out and say, well, this is how you remedy this particular clash of regulations and legislation, because it does happen. You formulate regulations for particular purpose, but the consequences thereof may be an impediment in work that has to be done in other areas here.
One school of thought would suggest that South Africa's legislations, laws governing the country are almost second to none, that they in themselves are not the problem. The issue is the implementation.
Yes.
So are we willing to say, there are laws in place that are adequate? The problem, therefore, is not in the legislation and is in the way that we execute. What do we do about that?
Yes, in certain instances, obviously, the problem would be with implementation rather than, legislation. So we will look at, because the central mandate is to investigate impact of all the legislation that Parliament has passed since 1994.
Some of the people, it's quite a high-powered panel, I must say. It's got the likes of your former Justice Minister, Bridget Mabanda, former Reserve Bank Governor, Tito Mboweni. It's got your former AG, Terence Nombembe. And so some of these people were quite instrumental in the formation of those legislations. Are they going to be willing to turn around and say, we may have made an error in judgment there and admit our fault?
Yes, yes, that's the spirit. The spirit is to be, as I said, if the final report is to be peer-reviewed under the UN, then it's got to, be as thorough as is possible. All
right, we're going to take a quick ad break, and when we come back, I want to talk about the funding of this, who's going to foot the bill. I want to find out where young people play in all of this as well, because as impressive as the list of panelists are, I'm not seeing any 30-year-olds. So we'll discuss all that and more. Maybe they may be young at heart, but as far as the age is concerned, I'm not seeing any youngsters. We'll just talk about the youth and young people, as well as money matters in just a moment. Stay with us.